A young woman drops to her knees in the snow, 12 miles behind her. Her lips have gone the color lips are not supposed to be. Ahead of her, 3 miles up a rutted track, a cabin sits alone against the mountains. Inside that cabin, a man is splitting wood. He has not spoken to another human being in 9 days. He has been alone here for 8 years, by choice, or by something that looks like choice from the outside. She is carrying a satchel that bangs against her leg with every step. Inside it, a letter, folded so many times the paper is soft. The letter was written by a dying man. The name on the envelope belongs to the man in the cabin. She has never met him. She is going to marry him. Somewhere in the valley below, a woman in an expensive coat has already begun to hear that a stranger has come to town. And in a shop with a green awning, an old woman looks up from her counter, because a bell she has been listening for 15 winters has finally begun to ring. She walked 12 miles through the first snow of the season to ask a stranger to marry her, and the man waiting at the end of that road had already decided to say no. Her name was Clara Ashford. She was 22 years old. She had buried her father 3 weeks back, lost the house 2 weeks after that, and now she was climbing a rutted track in a coat that had never been made for weather like this, carrying everything she owned in a satchel that banged against her leg with every step. If you want to know whether a marriage built on debt and desperation can turn into something worth dying for, stay with me, because this is the story of a promise, a dead man, a wooden box that waited 15 years in the wrong hands, and 6 women on horseback in the middle of a January night. But we begin with the snow. The first snow of the season came down slow, wet, heavy, the kind that stuck to the shoulders of a man's coat and stayed there. Elias Whitcomb had been splitting wood since before the light was good. His hands had gone past hurting, past feeling, into that numb place where a man could open himself on the axe blade and not know it till he saw the red on the snow. He kept swinging because there was a rhythm to it, and a rhythm kept his head quiet, and a quiet head was the only kind worth having out here. He was 36 years old, looked older, which was fine by him. The years had done that thing to his face where it stopped telling people anything. Folks down in Ridgeline called him distant when they were being polite, worse when they weren't, and he'd never once tried to correct them. A reputation did the work of offense. It kept things out, so a man didn't have to. The first he knew of her was the dog. Old Scout lifted his head from the porch boards, let out a low sound, not quite a growl, more a question. Elias straightened, one hand still on the axe, squinted down the long rutted track that ran from his place to the wagon road 3 miles off. There was a figure coming up it, on foot, in this cold, which meant a fool or somebody in trouble, and out here those came to the same thing. He waited. The figure resolved slow into a woman, small, wrapped in a coat that hadn't been made for weather like this, carrying a satchel that banged against her leg with every step. She walked like her feet hurt. She walked like she'd been walking a long while. She walked like she'd decided some miles back that stopping wasn't a choice she got to make. Scout got up, trotted out to meet her, tail going, traitor that he was, and Elias set the axe head down in the chopping block, wiped his palms on his trousers. She stopped maybe 20 feet off. Up close, she was younger than he'd guessed, pale, dark hair coming loose from under a knit cap. Her lips had gone a color lips weren't supposed to be. She was breathing hard, trying not to show it. "You're Elias Whitcomb." Not a question. "I am. My father was Henry Ashford." The name landed in him like a stone dropped down a well. He felt the splash of it, somewhere deep, somewhere old. For a second, he couldn't say anything at all. "Henry Ashford. You knew him." "I owed him my life." "There's a difference." Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion getting its hooks in. Her knees did a thing they shouldn't have. A small buckle. She caught it before it became a fall. And Elias was off the porch, across the yard, before he decided to move. "Easy." He got a hand under her arm. She was lighter than the satchel. "When'd you last eat?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked you." She didn't answer, which was an answer. He got her inside, into the chair by the stove, built the fire up till the iron ticked, put the coffee on, cut bread, the last of the smoked venison. She ate the way hungry people ate when they'd been raised polite, slow, deliberate, fighting the part of herself that wanted to fall on it. He pretended not to watch. The cabin wasn't much. One room, a loft, a stove that drew badly when the wind came from the north. He'd built it himself 8 years back, added to it the way a man adds to a thing he doesn't expect anybody else to ever see. She had the good chair. He leaned against the wall. He was aware, in a way he hadn't been an hour ago, of how the place must look to a pair of eyes that weren't his own. "You walked from the wagon road." The man who gave me the ride wouldn't come up the track, said his horse was tired. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "I think he just didn't want to." "That's 3 miles. I counted 2 before I stopped counting." Elias almost smiled. Almost. "Where'd you come from before that?" "Laramie, then a coach as far as my money went, which wasn't far, then whatever I could get." She looked up at him. Her eyes were her father's, gray, direct, the kind that didn't slide off you when things got uncomfortable. "I've been 3 weeks getting here, Mr. Whitcomb." "Elias, I've been 3 weeks getting here, and I'd rather just say the thing I came to say, than work up to it, if that's all right with you." He crossed his arms. "Say it then." She set the cup down, reached into the satchel, came out with an envelope, soft, creased, the kind of soft paper gets when somebody's opened and folded it 100 times. "He wrote this before he died. It's got your name on it. I read it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I read it about 40 times. Elias took the envelope. His own name was on the front, in a hand he half remembered, shakier than the man he'd known would have written. He didn't open it. Not yet. "Tell me what happened to him." So she did. Henry Ashford had gotten sick in the spring. His lungs. The doctor in Laramie called it one thing. The doctor they couldn't afford would have called it another. She expected it took him slow enough that they had time to lose everything trying to keep him alive. He'd put money into a freighting venture, a partner. The partner ran off with the cash and the wagons both, and by the time they understood they'd been robbed, her father was too sick to chase it. "And your mother died when I was 11. There's just me." She said it without any play for pity in it. "We sold the horses to pay the doctor, then the house to pay the men who held the note on the house, except the house didn't cover what we owed." She turned the coffee cup a quarter turn. "After the funeral, I had the clothes and the bag and that letter. He made me promise to bring it here. He couldn't say much by the end, but he was clear about that. 'Take it to Whitcomb,' he said. 'He'll know what to do.' She gave a short, tired breath. So here I am, and I confess, I don't know what you're supposed to do any more than you do. Elias looked down at the envelope. The fire popped. He opened it. The letter wasn't long. Henry had never wasted words alive, hadn't started dying. Elias read it once, fast, then again, slow. The man's voice came up off the paper, plain, that dry way he had, and Elias had to stop halfway, stand very still, look at the wall until the thing pressing at the back of his eyes agreed to stand down. What it said, in the parts that mattered, was this: my daughter needs a home, not pity. You owe me a life. I'm calling in another life, but not the way that sounds, because pity would break her. She was raised by a proud man, and she is a proud woman. Do not treat her like a rescue. She is not one. If you cannot offer her a home as an equal, put her on the coach back to Laramie. I will not have her degraded, not even by kindness. Choose carefully, Whitcomb. She is worth the choosing. Elias folded the letter along its soft creases, put it in his shirt pocket, over his chest, stood with his hand flat against it for a second, like he was keeping it from getting out. He never told me he had a daughter. He didn't tell most people much. She stopped. You'd have liked. You did like him, I suppose. Sorry. I keep talking about him like you have to be brought up to date, and you knew him longer than I've been alive. Near enough, 12 years. You'd have been a child. I was. She wrapped both hands around the cup again. I remember a man came once, when I was small. My father said you were the toughest man he ever pulled out of a river, and the only one who ever wrote back. She almost smiled, and that almost smile was the most alive her face had looked since she'd walked into the yard. I always pictured you bigger. Disappointing. A little, she admitted, and that small, honest dig, when she had nothing in the world and every reason to flatter the only man who might keep her from the cold. That was the first moment Elias thought maybe she'd come by more than her eyes from her father. He didn't propose anything that first night. He wasn't a fool, and he understood that whatever was going to happen, it wasn't going to happen. With her swaying in the chair and gray with road tired, he gave her the loft, and his good blanket, and the spare he'd been meaning to mend. He took the floor by the stove with Scout, and he lay awake most of the night, listening to the small, unfamiliar sounds of another person breathing above him in a space that had held only his own breath. For 8 years, he thought about a lot of things in the dark. He thought about Henry Ashford building a fire in the wet. He thought about the freight of the word promise, and how a dying man could load it onto the living and walk off into the ground, leaving them to carry it. Mostly he thought about the simple arithmetic of it. A woman alone in the territory had 3 or 4 roads. Most of them ran downhill. There was one road that solved most of it at once. He turned it over and over. He didn't like the shape of it, couldn't find a better one. In the morning he made breakfast. They ate without much talk. Then he set his cup down. I've got a proposal for you. Clara went still across the table. I want you to hear the whole of it before you say anything, because the front half is going to sound worse than the back half. All right. You can't stay here the way things are. A woman under this roof who isn't kin and isn't a wife is a woman this country is going to have a story about by Sunday, and the story won't be kind. I won't do that to you. He turned his cup in a slow circle. So here it is. You marry me. Not. He held up a hand. Not the way that word usually means, a practical thing, paper, a name that keeps the wolves off you, mine, for whatever it's worth out here, which is more than you'd think. The fire ticked. You'd have the protection of being a married woman with a roof and a claim. I'd have done right by the only man who ever did right by me. That's the bones of it. Clara was quiet a long moment. You're asking me to marry a man I met yesterday. I am. To solve a problem. To solve about 4 problems, but yes. And you don't want. She gestured. A small, awkward motion. Color came up in her cheeks, the first real color he'd seen in her face. I'm not asking for anything I'd have to ask for. I figure a thing like that's not worth having unless it's freely given. You'd be safe here. That's a word I mean. Safe from the country and safe from me, both. She looked at him for a long time. Why? She said finally. And don't say my father, because my father's been dead 3 weeks, and you owe a dead man nothing the law would recognize. It was a fair question. He gave her the unpolished answer. Because I was the half-frozen fool in the creek once, and a man I didn't know sat up 2 nights so I wouldn't die alone in the cold. And I've spent 12 years telling myself I'd have done the same for him, and never once had to find out if it was true. He shrugged. The shrug cost him something. Here's the finding out. You walked up my track instead of him. I'm not going to fail the test, just because the shape of it surprised me. Something in her face moved, not tears, but something. I need to think. Take all the time you want. She took the day. She didn't waste it. Elias went to his chores, half expecting her to keep to the cabin. Instead, she came out an hour later, in his spare coat, with the sleeves rolled. She stood watching him muck the horse stalls for about a minute, then picked up the other fork, started in on the far end. He opened his mouth to tell her she didn't have to. He shut it again. The ones who needed to feel useful didn't thank you for taking the chance away. At the noon meal, she said, "You're losing money on the hay." He set down his fork. "Am I? You buy it from the Pruitt place down valley. I saw the receipts in your tin. You don't throw anything away, which is good. You just don't organize any of it, which is bad. You've got the bottom land to grow yourself. In 2 seasons, you'd never pay another dollar for winter feed." She said it plain. My father always said, the difference between a man who survives out here and a man who gets ahead is whether he can do arithmetic when he's tired. Elias looked at her, this small, stubborn, half-starved girl who'd been on his place not yet a full day and had already found the leak in his boat. He say that to you a lot, all the time, right up until he stopped being able to do arithmetic of any kind. A shadow crossed, there and gone. He'd be furious about the freight venture. He always trusted the wrong people and distrusted the right ones. It's the thing that killed him, really, not the lungs, the trusting. Hard way to learn. I learned it. I learned it well. That night, the snow came in earnest. The stove roared. Scout had given up all pretense, lay against Clara's feet. I have conditions. Of course you do. You wouldn't be Henry Ashford's daughter if you didn't have conditions. Lay them out. She held up a finger. I keep the books, all of them. You hand me that coffee tin. I've watched what happens to a woman who doesn't know where the money is. I won't be her. Done. A second finger. I'm not a guest you tolerate. If I'm your wife on paper, I'm your partner in the work. My father raised me on a horse line. I can do more than you think, and I'll learn the rest. Done. Easier than the first one even. A third finger. She hesitated. And it stays what you said it is, a practical thing. If it ever became something else, it would have to be because we both. It would have to be real, or it would have to be nothing. There's no in-between I'll live in. Elias was quiet a moment. That's the one condition I already made myself, so we're agreed on it twice over. She let out a breath. He realized she'd been holding it, holding herself braced against some answer she'd feared more than the cold. And it occurred to him then to wonder what she'd seen on the long road here, what doors she'd had to walk away from, what the men who gave her rides and wouldn't come up the track had said, or hinted, or reached for. It put a low, cold anger in him that surprised him with its size. He kept it off his face. Then I suppose, my yes, with the conditions. With the conditions. Two people at a table in a snowstorm, agreeing to a marriage neither of them had wanted that morning. The storm blew 3 days. They were shut in together, two near strangers in one room, and somewhere in those 3 days, the awkwardness wore down into something else, because it turned out they were both quiet people, and quiet people can share a room more easily than talkers. She sorted his accounts. She asked her sharp questions, and he answered them. Twice he caught himself talking more than he'd talked to anybody in years, telling her about the land, about the high pasture, and the spring that didn't freeze. On the second night, she asked him about the river, about her father pulling him out. He told her he hadn't told anybody, ever, the whole of it. The way the ice had given without sound, the cold so total it had felt almost like heat, the dark water, and the certainty, calm and complete, that he was going to die there alone, and then a hand, a stranger's hand in the dark, and a voice cursing him for a fool. He cursed at you the whole time, called me every name there is, invented some new ones. Elias almost smiled at the memory. I asked him later why he was so angry, if he was saving me. He said anger was the only thing that'd keep his own hands working in that cold. Said if he let himself feel scared, we'd both die. So he chose mad instead. Clara went quiet. That's him. That's exactly him. Her voice had gone thick. He was angry the whole time he was dying too. Angry at the lungs, angry at the partner who robbed us, angry at himself. I used to think it was a hard way to go, but maybe it was the only thing keeping his hands working. Maybe it was. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, quick, embarrassed. He looked at the fire to give her the privacy of it. After a while, she said, in a steadier voice, "Thank you for telling me that. I didn't have many stories of him from before I was born. Now I have one. You'll have more. What there is, they're yours." She almost smiled, and then she said the thing he wasn't ready for. He kept your letters, every one, in a wooden box, in the trunk under his bed. I found them after he died. There are 43 of them, I counted. His mouth had gone dry. He kept his answers too, copies. I don't know why. He wasn't a man who kept much, but he kept those. She looked at him. Every winter, when it got bad, when the wind came down and shook the house, my father would come home from the barn, stamp the snow off, sit at the kitchen table, and he'd say, "Elias will be feeling this too, somewhere up in Wyoming." She paused. Then he'd tell me about you, something small. He told me about you every winter of my life, from the time I was small enough to sit on his knee until the winter he couldn't get warm anymore. Elias couldn't move. For 12 years he had thought he was alone. He had built a life out of being alone. He had shaped himself around it, and a man he'd known for 4 days had gone home to his kitchen table every winter for 12 years and told his daughter about him. Something in his chest did a thing he had no name for. I didn't know. I know you didn't. I'm telling you now. I thought you should have it. That story. It's yours. She looked at her hands. He didn't send me here because he was desperate. He sent me here because he trusted you. Those are 2 different things. He couldn't answer because there was no answer. In the arithmetic he had done alone for a decade. Something had been wrong. He had not been alone. He just hadn't known. The road cleared on the 4th day. They hitched the wagon, drove the long way down to Ridgeline. The preacher was through. As it happened, a tired circuit man named Tate, who married them in the church with the livery owner and his wife standing witness. It took less than 10 minutes. There were no rings, so when Tate got to that part, Elias just took her hand, held it, and that seemed to do. Her hand was small and cold, and he was careful with it. The way you'd be careful with something you'd been entrusted to keep. They stepped out of the church into the cold bright, and she was there, waiting. She was a handsome woman of about 55, dressed too well for Ridgeline, in a coat that had cost more than Elias's whole wardrobe. She walked like she owned the ground she stepped on, which she very nearly did. Adelaide Vance ran the biggest spread in 3 counties. She'd been after Elias's land for years. He'd told her no 4 times. Mr. Whitcomb. Her eyes went to Clara, and Elias watched them do the arithmetic. The wagon, the obvious recent business at the church, and then something happened he did not expect. Her face changed. Just for a second, she looked at Clara, really looked at her, and something moved behind her eyes that was not calculation, something older. You're Henry Ashford's daughter. Clara went still. You knew my father. I did. Not well, years ago, before you were born, perhaps. She paused. Is he? He died, Clara said. 3 months ago now. Adelaide's face did the thing again, the moving behind the eyes, then it closed, like a door. I'm sorry to hear it. So he sent his daughter here, to Whitcomb. That's a curious thing, isn't it, of all the men in the territory? He sent me to a friend, Clara said. Even. I'm sure he did, dear. It's a hard thing, to marry for a meal, but we do what we must in this country. My condolences on your father. He was. She chose her next word with care. A principled man. Some might say inflexibly so. Something in Clara's back went straight in a way Elias had not seen before. She looked at Adelaide for 3 full seconds. My father taught me 2 things, very early. The first was to eat a full meal before answering a rude person. The second was that a woman who calls another woman dear at first meeting is usually not. She paused. I did not marry for a meal. I married my husband. My father chose him for me before I ever knew his name. If you had known my father as well as you say, you would know he did not send his daughter anywhere by accident. Adelaide's mouth tightened. Good day, Mrs. Whitcomb. I look forward to knowing you better. She turned, walked back across the muddy street. Elias felt Clara let out a slow breath. She knew him, not just knew of him, she knew him. Sounded that way, and she didn't like him. No, my father never mentioned her, not once, in 22 years. Elias didn't answer, because he was thinking the same thing. He turned back to the wagon, and that was when he saw her, the old woman, standing at the edge of the boardwalk, wrapped in a shawl that had seen a lot of winters, watching them, not moving. She was old, maybe 68. Her face was the color of pale bark, and her eyes were the same gray as Clara's own. He'd seen her around Ridgeline for years. She kept a small shop where she sold cloth, buttons, notions. Her name was Miara Doyle. He'd never spoken more than 3 words to her. She saw him see her. She lifted one hand, not a wave, a summoning. There's a woman. Clara turned. Miara was already coming toward them, slow, careful, the way old people move on packed snow. She stopped in front of Clara, looked up at her. "You're Henry's girl." Clara went still again. "How do?" "Your eyes, child. I'd know those eyes if I saw them across a burning barn." Miara reached up, put a hand against Clara's cheek, brief, grandmotherly. "He said you'd have them. He said if a girl came into this town alone and looking for Elias Whitcomb, I was to bring her something." Clara couldn't move. Miara looked at Elias. "Bring the wagon around behind my shop, son. I've got a thing to give her, and I'm not doing it in the street." She turned, walked away, just like that. He drove the wagon around behind the shop. Miara came out through her back door, carrying a wooden box, small, about the size of a family Bible, dark wood, simple, old. She held it out to Clara. 15 years ago, your father came through Ridgeline. He stopped in my shop for thread, and we got to talking the way people do." Miara's voice was thin, but steady. "He came back the next day with this box. He said, 'Miara, I have a daughter. She's 7 years old. She is the best thing I have ever done, and I am not well. My lungs are not right, and I have a feeling that she will one day come through this country alone, when I am not here to guide her. I don't know how I know, but I know. Would you keep this and give it to her if she ever comes?" Clara was crying, not making any sound, silent, steady tears. He said, "She'll be looking for a man named Elias Whitcomb. When she comes, I've kept it 15 years. I'd almost stop watching for you, child, but I never stop watching." Clara held the box against her chest. Miara looked at Elias. "You must be Whitcomb." "Yes. He said you were a good man. He was wrong about a lot of things." "He wasn't wrong about you. You take her home now. She's had a day. She needs her fire. She needs a place where the walls know her." Miara turned, walked back toward her shop. They drove out of Ridgeline, with the box in her lap and her hand flat on top of it, like she was keeping it from getting out. Neither of them said anything, but something between them had changed. At the cabin, she sat in the good chair. She opened the box. Inside was a stack of letters, tied with string, old, yellowed at the edges. She untied the string. She read the first line of the first letter. She stopped. "My darling girl." Her voice broke on the last word. "He wrote them to me. He wrote them all to me, for every year I was going to have without him. There's 40 of them. He wrote 40 letters to a daughter who was 7 years old, because he already knew he was going to die." She was crying again, but she was smiling too. Elias sat down on the floor by the stove, where he'd slept the first night. He put his hand on Scout's head. He watched her read for a long time, silent. The fire ticked. She looked up finally. He knew. He didn't send me here because he was desperate. He was preparing me, my whole life, for this. She reached across the small space between them, put her hand on his, not asking anything, not offering anything, just there, warm, real, present. And Elias understood that whatever came next, whatever fight waited for them, whatever Adelaide Vance had known about Henry Ashford that made her face do the thing it had done, he was not going to face it alone, and neither was she. December came down on the valley the way December always did at elevation, hard, early, without apology. Clara had been on the place 5 weeks. She had already changed most of it. She hadn't asked permission. She had just moved. The coffee tin was gone from the shelf, replaced by 2 proper ledgers, one for the ranch, one for the household, both in her precise hand, both showing where every penny of Elias Whitcomb's 12 years alone had gone, and where it was going now. The boots stayed on the hooks by the door most of the time. The tools in the tack room had a system. She'd built it around who he was, not around what she thought he should be. He noticed. He didn't say anything. The letters from her father were her whole December. She read them slowly, one a day, sometimes 2. Each one was a piece of him she was getting back, and she didn't want to run out before she was ready. Some were short, some were long, some were about very small things, the way to buy a horse, how to tell if the man selling you flour was watering it down. Some were about very large things. One letter said, "My darling girl, if you are reading this, I am gone. That is a hard thing. It will be hard for a long time. But I want to tell you what I know about being alone. It is not the same as being lonely. Being alone is a room you can furnish. Being lonely is a room you cannot leave. If you are lonely, my darling, do not marry to fix it, because the wrong marriage will lock the door on you, and the right marriage will not open it either. Only you can open it. Marry only when you have already opened it yourself. Then a good man will be a room you visit, not a room you're trapped in." Clara read that one 3 times. Then she folded it back into the box. She sat by the fire a long time after. Elias, coming in from the barn, saw her face, did not ask, did not disturb, because he had learned in 5 weeks that there were spaces in this woman that belonged to her father and her alone. He built up the fire, sat down across from her. He knew me before I knew myself. He knew I would want to solve the loneliness by marrying. He knew I'd have to be told not to. He did not speak. He was writing to a girl who wasn't born yet. Not really. He was writing to the woman she would become. And he got her right. She looked at him. Am I that woman? I don't know that woman. I know this one. She's enough. Clara almost smiled. Ingrid Halverson came calling on a Tuesday in the 2nd week of December. She came on a horse she was too old to be riding in that weather, bundled in 3 coats, carrying a covered basket. Ingrid was 48 years old, broad-shouldered, weather-worn, with a face that had been arranged for laughing, even when she was serious. I brought bread, and I brought myself. Which one do you want first? Come in. She came in, took off her 3 coats, sat at Clara's table without being asked, the way a woman sits down, who has decided she is welcome, whether she is or not. You reorganized the tin. How did you? He came by the shop 3 weeks ago. Elias. He mentioned it, in passing, which is how Elias mentions everything. But he was pleased. So, Ingrid smiled. I came to see the woman who reorganized the tin. That's not the only reason. The real reason is that you've been on this place 5 weeks, and no woman from this valley has sat at this table with you. Not one. I decided if no one else was going to, I would. because I remember being new. Clara sat down across from her. You weren't from here. I was not. I came from Minnesota with Niels 18 years ago on a wagon with $3 and a stove. I was 29. I did not know one person in this valley. She set the cup down. No one came. For 2 months, not one woman came. They were watching to see if I would stay. That is how this country works. It watches before it welcomes. Clara did not speak. When they finally came, they came slow, and they came polite, and they never once said, "Sorry we took 2 months." They just came, and I was so grateful I nearly wept on the first one. Ingrid looked at Clara. I promised myself then that if a new woman ever came to this valley, I would not make her wait. So here I am, in week 5, which is faster than they came for me, but you have been here in winter, and winter is worse. Clara felt something rise in her throat. She swallowed it back. Thank you. I didn't come for thanks. I came so you would know that when the winter gets long, and it will, my cabin is 4 miles east. If you need anything, you come. Then she said, different voice, there is another thing, Adelaide Vance. Clara went still. I heard about the meeting in Ridgeline. That woman, she is a problem, and you should know what kind of problem she is. Before she becomes yours, she already is. How much has Elias told you? That she wants his water, that he's told her no 4 times. Ingrid nodded slowly. That is true, it is also only the beginning. I have been in this valley 18 years. I have watched Adelaide Vance do what she does to 6 families I know of. Some she bought out, some she pushed out. One family, the Cormacks, their barn burned down in August. When nothing burns in August, they sold their land the next week for half what it was worth. Clara's hands went cold. You think she... I don't think anything. I know what I have seen, and I know that the moment I heard she knew your father, my blood went sideways. Ingrid leaned forward. Listen to me, Clara. This is not gossip. This is a warning. That woman does not lose. If she is interested in you, it is because she has already decided how she is going to win, and you are already inside her plan. What do I do? You do what women in this valley have always done. You find each other, you stand together, and you do not let one woman face that alone. They talked for 2 hours. Clara did not remember later exactly what they talked about. She remembered the sound of Ingrid's laugh. She remembered feeling, for the first time in 5 weeks, that she was not the only woman in the country who understood something. When Ingrid left, she hugged Clara at the door. Clara had not been hugged in 3 months. She held on to Ingrid longer than she meant to. Ingrid did not comment. Ingrid just held her back, quiet, against Clara's hair. You are not alone, dear one. I know it feels like it, but you are not. She let go, got on her horse, rode away through the snow, and Clara stood on the porch, in the cold, and she pressed both hands against her face, and she cried, because it had been so long since someone had held her like that. The letters kept coming, 1 a day. Then on the 12th letter, something changed. She noticed it first as a small shift in the tone. The letters had been full of practical advice, buying horses, reading contracts, the kind of things a father passes down. But the 12th letter began, My darling girl, there is something I must tell you about a woman. Clara went still. Her name is Adelaide Vance, if you never encounter her. Burn this letter. If you do encounter her, read it twice, then burn it. But know this first. 40 years ago, before you were born, before I was even married to your mother, I made a decision. It was a right decision, but it hurt a woman badly, and she has never forgotten it. Adelaide's husband, Cyrus Vance, was a man I met on the road to Cheyenne when I was 22 years old. He was trying to buy a piece of land from a family called Weeks. The Weeks family had 4 children and a mother who was ill and no other place to go. Cyrus Vance was pressuring them to sell for a price that would have left them with nothing. I was there because I was carrying letters between land offices. I saw the paperwork. I told the Weeks family what Cyrus Vance was trying to do. They did not sell. He lost the deal. He was very angry. He was angry with me. Specifically, he said he would remember. I did not think of it again. Not really. 2 years later, I heard he had died. Fever. I thought, well, that is the end of that. Except it was not, because he had a wife, and she had believed him when he told her I had ruined him. She inherited his anger the way some people inherit money. She kept it. She grew it. I know this, because 8 years after that, I passed through Ridgeline, and I stopped in a shop owned by a woman named Miara Doyle. And Miara told me, Adelaide Vance still asks about you, Henry. She has never stopped asking. Miara told me to be careful. But, my darling girl, if you are reading this, and she has found her way to you, then know this. You did not do anything. This is not yours. This is a fight from before you were born. Do not fight her, Clara. Not the way she wants. She wants you to fight her because she has 40 years of practice and you have none. Do this instead. Find Miara Doyle. If she is still living, give her my name. She will help you. And know, my darling girl, that the only thing that has ever defeated Adelaide Vance is women who refuse to be alone. Find them. Stand with them. That is my answer to her. I love you. Sleep safe. Clara set the letter down on the table. Her hands were not shaking. That surprised her. She sat still. By the fire, she looked at nothing for a long time. Elias came in from the barn. He saw her face, said nothing, hung his coat, took off his boots, came and sat down across from her. He waited. She slid the letter across the table. He read it. He read it twice. Then he set it down, and she saw something in his face she had not seen before. It was anger, not at her, for her. Elias, I know. He wrote this to me when I was 7 years old. He knew. He knew she'd come for me eventually, not because I'd done anything, because I was his. Yes. She looked at the letter. He told me to find Miara Doyle. You found her already? She found me. Elias. She's been keeping the box. 15 years. My father knew. He set it up. 15 years ago. He reached across the table, took her hand, said nothing else, because there was nothing else to say. The next morning Clara went to town. Elias drove her. He did not ask why. She went into Miara's shop, alone. She was there for 1 hour. When she came out, her face was different again. She said, looking straight ahead, he was married to a woman before he met me, Cyrus Vance. He was married to a woman named Sarah Weeks, the daughter of the family he tried to cheat. Sarah refused him twice, but her family made her marry him because he was rich. She was 17, he was 40. She died within a year. Nobody knows how. Elias said nothing. Mayara, said the whole county whispered, but no one could prove anything. My father found out, later, long after. He blamed himself. He'd stopped one theft. He hadn't stopped the other. He carried that, his whole life. Clara turned to look at Elias. Adelaide didn't know about Sarah Weeks. Miara said, Adelaide came into that marriage after. She never met Sarah. She just knew that my father had ruined her husband once, and she built her whole life on being angry about that. Clara's voice went thin. 2 women were destroyed by that man, and one of them is Adelaide, and she doesn't even know. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Your father tried to warn you about her, but he also tried to make you understand her. Yes, because he pitied her. Yes. Clara wiped her eyes. He said, the only thing that has ever defeated Adelaide Vance is women who refuse to be alone. She took a breath. I have to go to Cheyenne. Now. Soon. There's a survey she's about to file. Miara heard about it. Adelaide has hired a surveyor to redraw the east boundary of this place. She'll claim the spring. On what basis? On a discrepancy in the 1867 survey, which is real. My father knew about it. That's why he told me to find Miara. Miara has documents from the original filing. She's been keeping them. 15 years. Elias sat with that. Your father prepared everything because he knew. How? I don't know how, but he did. I can't come with you. The stock. I know. You'll go alone. I've done harder, Elias. He looked at her. He saw that she had. You go. Miara helps you. I hold the place. When you come back, we fight. She reached across the wagon seat, took his hand. He turned his hand over, held hers. I don't want to leave. I don't want you to. She left on a Monday morning, in a coach heading south. She was gone 12 days. The days felt like weeks. He worked. He worked hard. He worked past what needed working, because a body in motion did not have room to sit in a chair and look at the empty chair across the table. Ingrid rode over twice. The first time she brought bread, stayed an hour, talked about her sister in Minnesota, about nothing important. Then she left. She had come to make sure he was eating. The second time she brought Niels. Niels was a large, quiet man who had learned to speak English at 40 and never fully forgave the language for its foolishness. He walked around the barn, checked the north fence line without being asked, mended 2 things Elias had been meaning to mend. Then he sat at Elias's table. She is coming back. Yeah, she's coming back. Then this. Niels gestured at Elias's face. You do not need. Yet. Elias almost laughed. He sat alone at the table for a long time after they left. He understood what Niels had meant. He was already grieving her. 12 days, and he was already grieving her. He had known her 7 weeks. Something, he thought, was very badly wrong with his arithmetic, or very badly right. He could not tell which. She came back on the 12th day, not on the northbound coach. She would not have taken it. She came on a hired wagon, which she must have paid for out of the last of her money. She came up the track at dusk, in the snow. He was on the porch. He had been on the porch, on and off, for 6 hours, not admitting to himself that he was watching. Scout saw her first. He always did. He went down the track at a run that his old bones should not have allowed. She got down out of the wagon, went to her knees in the snow, wrapped both arms around the dog, held him against her chest for a full minute. Then she stood up, walked toward the cabin, saw Elias, stopped, 10 feet from him. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them moved. You came back. I told you I would. I know. He came off the porch, walked to her, took her satchel, took her document case. Come inside. There's food. She followed him in, stood in the doorway a moment, looked at everything. The fire, the stove, the boots on the hooks, the ledgers on the shelf, at Scout who had followed her inside, wagging. I missed this. I missed you. He said it before he thought about it. He did not take it back. She almost smiled. Good. They ate. She told him everything. 12 days in Cheyenne, 8 days in the records room, under a green lamp, with a clerk named Whitaker who had known her father. She had found the survey discrepancy. She had found the abandoned homestead filing on the upslope parcel. She had found something Miara had told her to look for, which was a series of complaints filed and withdrawn and filed again by Adelaide Vance over 20 years against 7 small ranchers whose land she had eventually acquired. The pattern was unmistakable. She had also found a lawyer. His name was Ren Callahan, 28 years old, new to the territory, hungry for a case that would make him. He had said, Mrs. Whitcomb, I will take this on for a retainer of $40, and I will not lose. $40. I know. That's the mare I was going to sell in spring. I know. Sell her now. Get you the 40. Clara looked at him. She's your best mare. You're my wife. He said it, simple, like the fact it was. She looked down at her hands. Then she said, I have 30 of it. I saved it from the household allowance you give me. I haven't spent all of it. I need 10 more. You saved $30 in 7 weeks. I did. Elias sat back. Clara. What? You're a marvel. She almost smiled, real this time. I'm the daughter of Henry Ashford. You're both. He got up from the table, went to the shelf, pulled down the household ledger, looked at her columns of small numbers. I'll get the $10. Sell the calves I was going to keep. It'll be tight, but we'll do it. She stood up, walked around the table, stood in front of him. Thank you. He looked down at her. He put his hand against her cheek, just for a second, just once. She closed her eyes, leaned, very slightly, into his hand. He took his hand back. Bed, you're worn to nothing. She nodded, went up to the loft. He stayed downstairs by the fire for a long time. 2 weeks passed. She was tired. She slept hard the first 3 nights, but she recovered, and she began working again. Ren Callahan sent word he had filed the boundary confirmation. It was on the territory docket Adelaide's surveyor had filed. 2 days after Ren, 2 days, if Clara had come back a week later, they would have lost. She did not talk about that. She just kept working. The hay barn burned on a Thursday night in the 2nd week of January. Elias smelled it before he heard it, the specific wrong smell of hot wood and hay. That did not belong in the nighttime air. He was off the floor, out the door, before he was fully awake. Clara was 2 steps behind him. The hay barn was going, not fully, not yet. One corner, the northeast end, and the fire had a hold on it that was maybe 20 minutes old. What followed was not heroic. It was chaos. It was heat. It was the horses screaming in the corral. It was Clara running for the water pump, while Elias ran for the horses, because dead horses were a worse loss than burned hay. He got 3 out before the smoke got bad enough that the fourth one wouldn't come. He had to go in twice more. The second time he came out coughing hard enough that he couldn't straighten up. Clara's hand was on his back, pushing him away from the door. "The pump won't do it. We need the creek line. I already sent Scout for Niels." She'd tied a rag around her face against the smoke. Her eyes above it were watering. Clear. Focus. Bucket line. Where are the extra buckets? "Tack room, south wall." She went. He went back for the fourth horse, got a blanket over its eyes, got it out. She had sent Scout to Niels. Scout was old. He would take an hour, maybe more. They did not have an hour, except the dog was faster than she'd known, or Niels was closer than they thought, or something else altogether, because 12 minutes after the fire started, a horse came up the track at a hard gallop, then another, then another. Ingrid Halvorsen was on the first one. She was riding astride, which no woman rode in this valley. She was in trousers, which no woman wore in this valley. She had a bucket in each hand. Behind her was Maren Culver, whose husband ran the mill. She was 51. She had 4 children. She was also on a horse, also astride. Behind her, Miara Doyle, old, 68. She should not have been on a horse. In that cold, in that dark, in her nightgown and coat. But she was there. She had come, and behind her, 3 more women Clara did not yet know, whose husbands had land in the valley, who had seen the smoke from their kitchen windows. Not the husbands, the women. Not because the husbands wouldn't have come, but because the women were faster. 6 women, on 6 horses, in the middle of the night, in the middle of January. They came up the track like they had been waiting for the call all their lives. Ingrid was off her horse before it stopped. She was looking at Clara. "Where?" "Creek line, northeast corner, now." The women went. They formed a bucket line without being told, because they had done it before, in other barns, for other neighbors, because this was what the country asked, and they knew the shape of it. Mayara did not run buckets. She was too old. Instead, she sat by the front door of the cabin, and she prayed, out loud, in the old Irish. Ingrid ran the line. Clara ran the line. Maren ran the line. The other 3 women ran the line. And Elias, coming back from the corral, saw 6 women he had not asked, 6 women he had not called, fighting his fire at 2 in the morning. In January, he stood there for 1 second, just one, and then he picked up a bucket, took his place at the middle of the line. They fought that fire for an hour before Niels arrived, on the fastest horse the Halvorsens owned, alone, because his wife had been faster. The fire came down slow, resentful, but it came down. The barn stood on its far end, blackened, smoking, but standing, 2/3 of it saved, by 6 women and a man and a dog. At dawn, Clara sat on the porch step. Her face was black with soot. Her hands were burned. Her hair had come loose. She was shaking, not from cold, from something else. Ingrid sat down beside her, also black with soot. She did not say anything. She just put her arm around Clara's shoulders. Clara turned her face into Ingrid's neck, and she cried. Great heaving sobs that she did not try to hide, because there were 6 women there, and every one of them had cried once in her own kitchen, because the country was hard, and a woman alone could not hold it. Ingrid held her. Mayara came over, sat down on Clara's other side, put her old hand on Clara's back. Maren sat down on the step below. The other 3 women sat where they could. They did not speak. They did not need to. Elias stood off to the side because he understood that he was watching something that he did not have the right to be part of. His wife being held by 6 women he had barely known yesterday. She had built something in 7 weeks that he had not built in 12 years. She had built a room in this valley that she could enter any time, and the door was open to her. Adelaide had not counted on this. Adelaide had counted on burning them out. She had not counted on 6 women at 2 in the morning in January. She had not counted on Miara praying at the door. She had not counted on the arithmetic that a woman alone was a woman she could break, but a woman with sisters was not alone at all. Clara straightened finally, wiped her face, looked at the women around her. "Thank you." Ingrid squeezed her shoulder. "We watch for smoke. From all of our windows, we have been watching for weeks. We knew that woman burned Cormac's 22 years ago. We knew if she was interested in you, she would burn you too, so we watched." "Ingrid, how did you know she was interested in me?" Ingrid looked at Miara. Miara looked at Clara. "Because Adelaide Vance came to my shop, dear. 3 weeks ago, she asked me if I had heard anything about the new Whitcomb wife. She came because she wanted to know, and I sent word to Ingrid the next day, and Ingrid sent word to Marin, and Marin sent word to the others." Clara looked at the women around her. "You've been watching my house." "We have." Miara stood up, slowly. Old bones, old dignity. That woman has stood alone for 40 years because she was married to a bad man who taught her the world was a fight, and she has been fighting alone ever since. What defeats her, girls, is not our victory. What defeats her is the sight of us sitting together on a porch at dawn after a fire she started and could not finish. She looked at Clara. "She will hear about this morning by tomorrow noon, and she will understand that she has lost, not the land, not the case, something older. She will understand that she is watching from the outside, something she was never invited to." Miara touched Clara's cheek. "That is what your father meant, child. Not defeat by force, defeat by belonging, which is worse, because it cannot be fought, it can only be watched." Miara turned, walked slowly toward her horse. The women stayed another hour, sat on the porch step. In the growing light, they talked. Small practical things, what Clara would need, where the hay could be borrowed from. Elias listened. He did not speak. His wife on the porch step, in the arms of women who had ridden through the night for her, was in the room she had been trying to enter since her father died. She had opened the door herself. The women left as the sun came up. Clara stood on the porch, watched them ride away. Elias came and stood beside her. "I know what we do next." "Tell me." "We take everything to the sheriff. Adelaide made a mistake tonight. She used Boone Harker. Miara knew his boot. That was his boot in the mud by the barn. Miara saw it before the sun came up. Sheriff Crum. Careful, man. Not this time. This time he's going to be brave, because we're going to give him something he can't ignore." She turned to look at Elias. "Adelaide fought my father alone for 40 years, and she was going to fight me alone, and she was going to win, because a woman alone in this country is a woman she can break." Clara took a breath. "But I am not alone. I have never been alone. My father made sure of that, and Miara made sure of that, and Ingrid made sure of that, and you," she looked at Elias, "you made sure of that." He did not trust himself to speak. He put out his hand. She took it. They stood on the porch, holding hands, two people, in the smell of wet char, in the gold light of the January dawn. Sheriff Dale Crum had held his post for 11 years. He was a careful man, not a coward, careful, in the specific way of someone who understood that Adelaide Vance had been in this county longer than he had, and would likely be here after him. When Elias Whitcomb had come to him twice before about the boundary survey business, Crum had listened politely and done approximately nothing. He had felt all right about that. So, when Clara and Elias came through his office door on a Thursday morning in late January, Crum had his polite listening face ready, his filing cabinet mentally open. What he had not prepared for was the 6 women behind them. They came in one by one, Ingrid first, then Marin, then the 3 whose names Crum knew only from the church register, then Miara Doyle, last, because she was slowest. They stood in a half circle behind Clara, and they said nothing. They just stood. Clara stepped forward, set a notebook on his desk. Sheriff Crum, my barn burned Thursday night. My name is Clara Whitcomb. I have evidence that the fire was set. I have evidence of who set it. I have evidence of who paid for it. And I have 6 witnesses who saw the fire while it was still small, because they were watching for it, because they knew it was coming. Crum blinked. Watching for it. Yes. How did they know it was coming? Because a woman named Adelaide Vance has been asking questions about my household for 7 weeks, and the women in this valley have seen this pattern before, and they organize without my knowing. She paused. You may know this pattern too, Sheriff. You may have known it a long time. The sheriff sat very still. Miara Doyle said, quietly, I saw Boone Harker's boot in the mud. Dale, beside the barn. I have known that boot for 30 years. It is the same boot I saw beside the Cormac's barn 22 years ago, before it burned. I did not speak then. I am speaking now. Crum did not move. He did not look at Miara. He looked at the notebook. Clara turned pages, walked him through it, in order, piece by piece, each item sourced, dated, the boot track measurements with a sketch, the wool fiber wrapped in paper, the marked bottle, the Hendricks supplier in Douglas, Boone Harker's record, his previous work for Adelaide Vance, the Cormac's fire, the Marsh family fire in Converse County 4 years ago, and the letter, a single sheet, sworn, signed, from Jonah Reed, age 20, who had spent 4 years waiting for someone to ask. Jonah's letter said, I saw a man crossing our east fence line 2 nights before our barn burned. He walked with a bad right foot, the heel worn on the outside, same as the print you described, Mrs. Whitcomb. I would swear to it in any court in the territory. Crum read it twice. This is circumstantial, yes, but it is consistent, documented, cross-county, and it involves a man you know has been accused of this before and never properly investigated. She kept her voice even. We are not asking you to arrest anyone today, Sheriff. We are asking you to compel testimony, specifically from Hendricks Supply and from Boone Harker. If the testimony does not support the pattern, then it does not. We will live with that. Crum sat back, looked at the ceiling, the gesture of a man doing difficult arithmetic. Then he looked back at Clara, then behind her, at the 6 women, standing, silent, then at Miara Doyle, whose eyes had not left his face. I will write to the Douglas sheriff today. I will have a conversation with Harker, and I will send a deputy to speak with Adelaide Vance. Ingrid said, without moving. You will not send a Deputy Dale. You will go yourself. Crumb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Once. I will go myself. Clara pushed the notebook across. Keep it. It is a copy. Wren Callahan in Cheyenne has a second copy, in case you decide later that the papers are not what I said they were. Crumb looked at the notebook. You do not have to keep threats behind your evidence, Mrs. Whitcomb. I know that, Sheriff. I hope you know it too. She turned, walked out. 6 women turned, walked out behind her. Elias was the last through the door. He tipped his hat, not to Crumb, to Miara, who was already halfway down the boardwalk. The next weeks moved fast in the ways that mattered. Boone Harker was brought in. He denied everything with practiced ease, but he made one mistake. He placed himself on the east side of the county on the night of the fire, visiting a cousin, whose name he gave. The cousin confirmed the visit, but said Boone had left by 9, which was 3 hours before Elias had smelled smoke. Then Crumb spoke to Reese Colton, Adelaide's foreman. Colton was smart in some ways, and weak in others, smart enough to have kept records of his own, the specific self-protective record-keeping of a man who understood he might someday need to prove he was not the only one who knew things, weak enough that when the sheriff made it clear the arson charge was serious, that Boone was already pointing fingers, that whoever cooperated first would be treated differently. Reese Colton made a decision in about 4 minutes. He had 2 letters, written in a hand Clara recognized immediately, the particular looping cursive of a woman who had been educated somewhere expensive, signed only with an initial, but addressed to Colton at the Vance bunkhouse. The letters did not say burn the barn. They said nothing in those words, but they discussed, in careful oblique language, the desirability of a situation in which the Whitcomb operation became untenable. One of them mentioned the timing of winter, the worst weeks, and one ended with the line Wren Callahan later read aloud in the magistrate's hearing room. I trust you'll use your judgment about the most persuasive approach. Elias was not in Cheyenne for that hearing. Clara was. She took the southbound coach on a Tuesday, came back on a Friday, 2 days earlier than expected. She climbed down in the yard, looked at Elias on the porch. Colton talked. Elias let out a breath he had been holding since Tuesday. Come inside, she told him. Over supper, the letters, the testimony, the particular moment when Wren had read that final line, and the magistrate's face had gone from professionally neutral to something that was not neutral at all. The magistrate referred it to the territory prosecutor. Criminal charges, arson, conspiracy, fraud on the boundary filing, 20 years of false property claims. She paused. It will take months, but it is out of our hands now. It is in the territory's hands. That is where it belongs. Yes, she turned her coffee cup, a gesture as known to him now as the sound of her step on the porch boards. Wren says, even if she avoids the criminal conviction, the boundary documentation is permanent record now. She cannot take our line. Whatever else happens, she cannot take that. Then the most important thing is settled. Yes, the court case ground on the way Wren had said it would. Slow, technical, full of procedural back and forth that cost money and patience in equal measure. There were months where nothing seemed to happen, where the case sat somewhere in the territorial system, and Elias and Clara went about their work. They did not talk about it much, because talking did not move it. What they talked about instead was everything else: the land, the plan she had for the spring planting, the crop rotation ideas she developed from the technical manual she read aloud in the evenings, the Halverson children who came around now, with the casual frequency of children who had decided a place was safe. The youngest one in particular, a 4-year-old named Astrid, who had appointed herself Scout's personal keeper and who Clara taught to count using the beans in the supply tin. He was not good at saying things. He had never been. He showed what he meant with actions instead. The extra blanket at the start of winter, positioned so she would find it, without ceremony. The way he had started building the fire so it was properly going before she came down from the loft. The shelf he put up beside the desk for the document box, because she had been stacking things on the desk's edge, and he could see it bothered her. Clara noticed. She showed what she meant the same way, through the doing. The coffee that appeared when he was scowling at something he could not fix, the plate covered with a cloth on the table, when he came in late from a check on the stock. They were learning each other, the long way, the honest way, the way that did not have a shortcut. Then in March, Wren wrote with news. Boone Harker had entered a formal guilty plea on the arson charge. In exchange for reduced sentencing, his statement named Reese Colton as the co-conspirator and confirmed that the instruction had come from the Vance operation. The plea was on record. The testimony was on record. Adelaide's lawyers were arguing that Boone's word was unreliable, and they would keep arguing it. But the boundary fraud case was now proceeding on its own evidence, which required no testimony from anyone, just the documents Clara had found. Wren wrote, "The boundary fraud matter is substantially resolved in your favor. What remains is the court's formal confirmation, which I expect within 2 to 3 months. She cannot win back what she has already lost, which is the public record. The territory now knows what she is. That tends to matter more than verdicts in the long run." The boundary confirmation came in April. The document arrived by post. Official, sealed. Clara opened it at the table, read it through in its bureaucratic language. Then she turned it over, set it face down, put her palms flat on the back of it. "That is it. That is ours. Ours." The word meant more than the land. They both knew it, but there was one more thing before it was truly over. Clara went to Ridgeline in the second week of April, alone. She said she had errands. Elias did not ask. She came back at dusk, sat down at the table, did not take off her coat. I went to see her. Elias did not need to ask who. He set down his cup. Alone. I'm sorry. I did not want to talk myself out of it. All right. I need to tell you what happened, but first I need you to know why I went. She took a breath. My father wrote in one of the letters that she was married to a bad man, that he taught her the world was a fight, and that she had been fighting alone for 40 years. She looked at her hands, and I thought about what Miara said on the porch after the fire, that she is watching from the outside of a room she was never invited to, and I thought about how much of my life I could have spent being like her if my father had not written me those letters. She looked up. I did not go to forgive her. I did not go to fix her. I went because my father tried to tell her once, 40 years ago, and he did it wrong. He was young and righteous, and he made an enemy. She wiped her eye. Quick. I thought Maybe someone should try once more, not to defeat her, not to argue with her, just to sit in a room with her and not be her enemy. What happened? Clara told him. The Vance house was large, colder inside than outside. Adelaide had opened the door herself, which surprised Clara. She had looked at Clara for a long moment. I wondered when you would come. She had let Clara in. They had sat in a parlor with tall windows and a fire that was too small for the room. Adelaide had poured tea. Neither of them had drunk it. Clara had said, simply, I read something my father wrote about your husband. I thought you should know what my father knew. She had put a folded copy of the letter on the tea table. Adelaide had not touched it. You came here to give me a letter. I came here to give you the truth about what my father saw. Once, when he was 22 years old, Adelaide's face had done something Clara did not understand at first. Behind the stillness there was something slow, very old. I know what your father saw. Clara had gone still. You know. I have always known. Cyrus told me the night he came home from that deal. He was drunk. He was furious. He told me what he had tried to do and what your father had done. He said, there's a young man on the road who will pay for the rest of his life, and I believed him. Adelaide had looked at the fire. I was 23 when I married him. I was already afraid of him, but I did not know why. Not until he told me, sitting in our kitchen, drunk and laughing, about what he had tried to do to those children. She had paused. That was the first time I understood what I had married. Clara had said nothing. I could have left him. I did not leave him, because I did not know how, because I was afraid, because my own family had told me I had made my choice. She had looked at Clara. I stayed, and I made him useful to me, and when he died, I kept everything he had built, and I made it bigger, because that was the only revenge I could imagine, was to become bigger than him. Adelaide had turned the teacup in her hands. And your father was the man who could have stopped me once if he had come and told me what I already knew, if he had said the words out loud to me instead of only to a family in Ohio, if he had thought to save me too. So I hated him for 40 years for not saving me. Clara had sat very still. He wrote about you in one of the letters just before he died. He said, the only thing that has ever defeated Adelaide Vance is women who refuse to be alone. Clara had looked at Adelaide. He was wrong. Adelaide had looked up. He was wrong about defeat. It should not be defeat. It should be the ending of a fight that was never yours to begin with. Adelaide had not moved. Mrs. Vance, my father should have come to see you. I understand that now. He should have knocked on your door and said, I am the man from the road, and I saw what your husband was, and I am sorry for not coming to you sooner. He should have done that. He did not. Maybe because he was afraid, maybe because he had a wife and a small daughter. But I know he carried it. He wrote about it in a letter to me when I was 7 years old, so he must have hoped that someday, some way, somebody would come. Clara had paused. I am coming, on his behalf. 40 years late, Adelaide had sat very still. I am not here to forgive you. I do not have the standing. You have not asked, and it is not mine to give. I am here because my father should have come, and I am his daughter, and what he could not finish, maybe I can finish. This much of it. Adelaide had not spoken. Clara had stood. You do not have to say anything. What you do with it is yours. She had walked to the door, put her hand on the knob. Wait! Clara had waited. Adelaide had stood up slowly, walked to the tea table, picked up the letter, held it in both hands. I have burned every letter I have ever received. In 40 years, from anyone, I will not burn this one. Clara had said nothing. Your father was not the man I have been fighting. I know that. I have always known that. It is why I fought so hard, because I could not fight the actual man. He was already dead, so I fought his ghost, and your father was the closest thing I had to a body I could hurt. She had looked at the letter. I am too old to change what I have done, but I am not too old to know what I have done. She had looked up. Please tell your husband that I will not come at you again, not through his water, not through his fence, not through his barn. It is over. Between us, you do not have my apology. I do not have the practice for one, but you have my word. Clara had said, thank you. Adelaide had said, thank Miara Doyle. Sometime. I do not have the words, but she has been watching me from that shop for 40 years, and she knew. I have known she knew, and I have hated her for it, and I have hated her for still being kind to me. Anyway, she had paused. Tell her, when you see her next, that I will come to her shop this spring to buy thread. Clara had said, I will tell her. Then she had left. Elias sat at the table long after Clara had finished telling him. Clara, yes, you are your father's daughter. I am, I know. You are your own woman. I hope so. You are. He paused. You are also mine. He said the last part rougher than he meant to. She looked up at him. Yes, she said, simple. I am. Spring came properly in May. With it, the planting Clara had been designing in the margins of her notebooks. All winter, she had done her arithmetic. She had done her research. She put in more than Elias would have tried alone, more diversified. The hay cutting tool came in June, paid for with what they had saved on winter feed. The first cutting on the south meadow was better than any before. By the following winter, they would owe no one for hay. The margin that had always been thin would be, for the first time, something approaching comfortable. Comfortable was not a word Elias had ever applied to his own life before. He tested it carefully, the way you test ice, putting a little weight on it. It held. Miara Doyle died in her sleep in the second week of June. Ingrid brought the news on horseback. Early morning. She stood on the porch, did not come in. Miara went in the night. Marin found her this morning. She was in her chair, by the window, with her Bible in her lap, and a cup of tea on the table, barely cool. Clara sat down on the porch step. Ingrid sat down beside her. She left a will. She wanted you to know some things. Before the reading, she left her shop to Marin. She left her savings, split in 3, a third to the church, a third to you, and a third. Ingrid paused. A third to Adelaide Vance. Clara pressed her hands against her face. Why? There is a note, Miara wrote. Adelaide has spent her life with only things to keep. Give her something to give away. It may open a door in her that she has held closed a long time. Ingrid put her hand on Clara's back. Miara went to see her, Clara, after you did. 2 weeks ago, she rode over in the wagon. She spent an afternoon there. She did not tell any of us, but Marin found the note in her cash drawer, written to us, to all of us, in case. She said, Adelaide is not our enemy anymore. Please remember that when I am gone. that our sisterhood only means something if it means something for the ones on the outside as well as the ones who are already warm. Clara cried, silent, into her hands. Ingrid sat with her for a very long time. The reading of the will was held in Mira's shop. Marin conducted it. She was executor. Ingrid was there, the three other women from the barn fire, Clara and Elias, Reverend Tate, and in the doorway, standing very still, Adelaide Vance. She had come without invitation, without notice. She stood in the doorway, in a black coat. Her face was still. Marin looked at her. "Come in, Adelaide." Adelaide came in. She stood at the back, beside the fabric bolts, and she listened. When Marin came to Adelaide's portion, the whole room went quiet. "And to Mrs. Adelaide Vance of Ridgeline, I leave a third of my savings in the amount of $682, and I leave, with this money, a wish that she will use it for the benefit of another, and in doing so may find what I have found, that the greater gift is always the giving and not the keeping." The room was silent. Adelaide did not move. She did not speak, but something in her shoulders was different. After Marin finished, Adelaide crossed the room, stopped in front of Clara. Clara stood up. "I do not know what to do with it." "You will." Miara said that I might use it for another. "I know. I will think on it." Then she nodded once, to Clara, to Elias, to Marin. She turned, she walked out. The women in the shop watched her go. Ingrid said softly, after the door closed, Miara Doyle, in her cash drawer, wrote her final act of stubbornness as a favor to Adelaide Vance, who tried to burn down our sister's barn. Clara said, "That is who she was." Ingrid nodded. She was the mother we all needed to become someday. They rode home in the wagon, Elias driving, Clara beside him. The valley was full of June, full of green, full of the specific hard, bright light of a Wyoming afternoon that had just been washed by a thunderstorm. Clara said, "Halfway home." Elias, "Yes. Do you remember what you said that first night?" "I said a lot of things that first night." "You said that you would work as hard as I did, every day, whatever the place asked. You said that was the promise you could keep." He remembered. "I have kept it." "You have." She was watching the mountains. "I have been thinking about what I would have said if you had made a different promise, something bigger, something about love or forever." She made a small gesture with her hand. "I think I would have run." He looked at her sideways. "I needed the small, honest promise. I needed to see whether you would keep the small one before I could trust any of it." She turned to look at him. "You told me not to make promises you could not keep. You listened." She paused. "Do you know how rare that is? A man who listens to what a woman actually says instead of what he thinks she means." "I could not afford not to listen. You would have taken the coffee tin and left." She laughed. "Probably." The laugh settled into something softer. "Thank you, Elias, for the small, honest promise, for keeping it." He reached over and took her hand, the way he had taken it in the church 8 months before. The same care, the same deliberateness. They rode like that all the way home, neither of them saying anything. At the cabin, he unhitched the team. She went inside, started the fire, started the coffee. He came in, hung his coat. She said, without turning, "Elias?" "Yes, I love you." He stood very still, by the door. She turned, looked at him. I have been thinking for a long time whether to say it, because you and I made an arrangement, and the arrangement did not require it, and you told me that it would have to be real or it would have to be nothing, because there was no in-between you would live in. She paused. And you were right about that, and I would not have said it if it were not real, but it is, and I would rather say it and find out where we stand than not say it and keep guessing. She looked at him, waiting. Elias could not move for a moment. You are not guessing wrong. That is very Elias. He almost smiled. I have been working up to something better for about 6 months. How much longer do you need? She looked at him, really looked. He said, playing, I love you. I have been building up to better, but that is what it is. She stepped toward him, put her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They stood there, in the small, warm cabin, by the door. Scout looked up from his place by the stove, approved, went back to sleep. They stayed like that a while. Then she straightened up. The south post is leaning. Which one? The one by the corner, where the wire wraps. I saw it this morning. I know you did. You made a note in the ledger. You saw the ledger. I read the ledger every night, Elias. It is my job. It is your job. It is our job, but mostly mine. He laughed. Actually laughed. It came out of him surprised and a little rough, because he had not practiced. Clara looked at him with something like wonder. Oh, what? I have not heard that before. You have. Not like that. Well, he did not know what else to say. She said, very softly, I want to hear it again. He looked at her. He said, even softer, then stay. Something in her face broke and then reformed into something new. I will. The summer came in with everything it usually brought. The heat, the dry, the specific August afternoon light that turned the valley gold and made you understand that this was why the winter was worth surviving. Adelaide Vance came to Miara's shop as promised, not for thread. She used part of the $682 to hire a young girl from a poor family down valley, the Delaney's, whose father had died in an accident 3 winters ago. The girl was 13. Her name was Bess Delaney. Adelaide paid her a proper wage to work 3 days a week in the shop that Marin was trying to run in addition to her farm. The rest of the money Adelaide gave, piece by piece, over a year, to 3 other families she had once hurt in one way or another. She did not announce it. She did not sign her name. She sent it through Marin. Marin knew. Everyone knew, but no one said anything. Adelaide came into Ridgeline more after that. She was still herself, still stiff, still difficult, still capable of saying something cutting to a shopkeeper if the mood took her. But she came, and she sat, occasionally, on the bench outside Marin's shop, in the sun, and she watched the town, and once, only once, Clara Whitcomb saw her sit down beside her on that bench and say nothing, and Adelaide had said nothing back, and they had sat there, 2 women, for a full 10 minutes in the sun. Then Adelaide had stood up and gone, but she had nodded to Clara before she left, and Clara had nodded back. That was all. That was enough. The court case ended not with a bang, but with paper. Adelaide received a civil judgment. 20 years of false property claims confirmed, a financial penalty, publicly documented, legally permanent, no criminal conviction because the criminal bar was higher and her lawyers were very good, Boone Harker served 18 months. Reese Colton left the county and was not heard from again in that part of Wyoming. Adelaide stayed. That was the thing. She stayed. On her reduced range, she passed the Whitcombs on the road in Ridgeline twice in the following years, and she did not stop, and they did not stop either, but they nodded each time. Once, only once, she sent Clara a small parcel, wrapped in brown paper. It contained a piece of good lace, not new, very old, the kind of lace that came from a wedding dress or a christening gown. There was no note. Clara understood. She used the lace to trim a small dress for her daughter. Yes, their daughter. She was born in the winter of the second year. Elias delivered her himself in the cabin in a snowstorm because there was no time to go for anyone. Ingrid arrived 20 minutes after the girl. They named her Miara Ashford Whitcomb. Ingrid held her first, after Clara, then Elias. Elias held his daughter in his arms, in the amber light of the fire, in the small warm cabin that had once held only his breath. He said, very softly, "Hello, small one." His daughter looked up at him. She had her mother's gray eyes. Even at 10 minutes old, "I have been waiting for you." The ranch grew, not into an empire, into a life. Clara kept the books. Elias kept the fences. Miara Ashford Whitcomb grew tall like her father, stubborn like her mother, kind like her grandfather, who she had never met, but whose letters she read when she was older in the wooden box that Miara Doyle had kept for 15 years. A brother came, then a sister. The cabin grew rooms, then it grew a proper house. But the original room, with the stove and the good chair and the shelf where the ledgers had first replaced the coffee tin, they kept it, because it was the room where a woman had come, in the snow, and a man had said yes to a promise he was not sure he could keep, and it had turned out that he could, and she could, and they did. On a summer evening, in the third year, Elias and Clara sat on the porch of the cabin they had built themselves. The sun was going down over the mountains, turning the valley gold, turning everything gold. Their daughter was on the porch floor between them, playing with a wooden horse that Niels Halverson had carved. Scout old now, but not yet ready to give up on the world, lay with his head on the little girl's foot. Clara had a letter in her lap. She had been writing it for weeks, adding a line at a time. When something came to her, it was addressed to her father. She would never send it. She knew that. There was nowhere to send it to, but she was writing it anyway, because there were things she wanted him to know. She wanted him to know that the letters he had written her when she was 7 years old had done everything he had hoped they would. She wanted him to know that the box he had left with Miara Doyle had been found, and open, and read, and understood. She wanted him to know that the man he had sent her to had turned out to be exactly what he had believed he would be, and more than what any of them could have known. She wanted him to know about the 6 women who had ridden through the night for her, about the barn that had been saved, about the woman who had spent 40 years being angry at his ghost, and who had, at the very end, been sitting on a bench in the sun. She wanted him to know that she was safe and loved and a mother, and that his granddaughter had his eyes, and that when the little girl was old enough to read, Clara was going to give her the wooden box and tell her the story of her grandfather, who had prepared for her existence before she existed, who had made her possible in ways she would spend her whole life discovering. Clara looked up from the letter. Elias was watching her. He was in the good chair, the one she had made him take, because the desk chair suited her better. What? Nothing, just watching you, she smiled. That is very Elias. I know. Their daughter looked up from the wooden horse. Papa, the post. She pointed toward the south fence. Elias followed her small finger. What about it, small one? It is not standing. Clara laughed. She had taught her daughter that phrase, the one Clara herself said, when she saw a fence post starting to lean, because Miara Ashford Whitcomb, 3 years old, was already the kind of person who noticed things. You are right. It is not standing. You fix it, Papa. Tomorrow. Why not now? Because right now Papa is sitting on the porch with your mama and you and Scout, and that is where Papa needs to be right now. The little girl considered this. She nodded. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. She went back to the wooden horse. Elias reached across the small space between his chair and Clara's, took her hand. She let him. The sun went down. The valley went dark. The stars came up hard and bright, the way they did at elevation, somewhere in Ridgeline. Adelaide Vance was sitting alone in her large house, but not as alone as she had been, because tomorrow the Delaney girl would come, and she would sit with Adelaide for the afternoon, and they would talk about small things, and Adelaide would give her lunch somewhere down the valley. Ingrid Halverson was banking her stove. Ann Niels was checking the barn one last time, and their children were asleep somewhere in a wooden box in a small, warm cabin. 28 remaining unread letters waited for the winters they would be needed in. And on a porch, at the end of a rutted track, 3 miles from the wagon road, a man and a woman and a small girl and an old dog sat in the last light, and Clara said, to no one in particular. He knew. Elias understood. He knew all of it, somehow. He knew you. That was enough. She squeezed his hand. Small, honest promise. Kept. The stars came out. The valley slept. The south post leaned a little more but held. It would hold for many more years, because it had been well set, in good ground, by a man who knew how to build things that lasted, and in the wooden box, under the shelf where the ledgers were, 28 unread letters waited, and they would be enough for all the winters that were still to come.